So hello everyone, I'm Maya Benari. I'm a front-end designer at 18F. So 18F is a digital services team inside the government, and I'm so stoked, so excited to be here amongst all of you amazing designers and developers from all across the industry. So first, I have a question for all you. Show of hands, how many of you have designed something for at least 1,000 people? That's a good amount, nice. How about at least 1 million people? That's also a good amount. There's a lot of global enterprise companies here, great. So I'm part of a team that was tasked with designing something for 320 million people, the population of the United States. I want to talk about one of those 320 million people, Joanne. This is Joanne. Joanne just came back from serving in the Army. As a young veteran, she wants to make use of her GI Bill benefits and apply for federal student loans to help her cover the cost of attending college. This is what Joanne has to go through. She has to wade through multiple agency websites to access the federal programs which will help her afford college. She finds dozens of government websites which all seem relevant to what she's looking for. Joanne is confused. Are these programs related to each other? Are they all even a part of the federal government? Are any of these a scam? When she tries to access the sites on the bus on her commute to work, she finds that half of them are impossible to use on her phone. She's overwhelmed by how hard these tools are to use, misses opportunities she's eligible for, and feels frustrated and isolated. The system that was supposed to help her stands in her way. Joanne is not alone. Millions of people trying to escape poverty in the United States struggle to complete the confusing paperwork to get the help they need. Others are caught in the maze of trying to immigrate to the United States. When the American people go online to access government services, they're often met with confusing navigation systems, a cacophony of visual brands, and inconsistent interaction patterns. Joanne has to relearn and reorient herself every time she accesses a government website. And these aren't small websites. These are vital services. They are important American institutions. It's the Department of State. It's the US Supreme Court. And who can forget NSA for Kids, which you can access in Flash. So the problem is we don't have clear and open communication with our own governments. Here's why this matters. Just to show you how this all scales, we spend a ton of money, $86 billion a year on federal IT projects. Over 90% of them are over budget and behind schedule. 40% of them never see the light of day. They're scrapped or abandoned before they're even finished. So we are spending a ton of taxpayer dollars and failing people like Joanne. Now I'm going to explain why it's like this. So the government has historically bought IT just like they bought bulk pencils and tanks. Huge contracts of highly spec'd out work go out and create a waterfall process. Contractors are awarded these billion-dollar contracts. They go off for 2 years to build the thing, and when they come back, the product doesn't work as anticipated. So the agency either drops it or is forced to keep a really poorly functioning product because they've spent so much time and money on it already. These products meet the spec, but ignore the person using it. They're obsolete or irrelevant the day it arrives. It became clear that if we wanted to help Joanne, we had to help the people making these digital services. So the question in front of us became, could we build these easy to access, easy to use tools that serve the public's need? And second, is it possible to create a shared set of tools to provide consistent, effective, and easy to use government websites? So we think this is possible. In the summer of 2015, the US Web Design Standards team formed to work on these tools. The core team was from 18F, where I'm from, and the US Digital Services, which is like us, but it's kind of housed in the White House. And we had a lot of help from the Food and Drug Administration, the Department of Education, Veterans Affairs, USA.gov, and a host of many, many others. So when we started this process, we noticed that the private sector has been exploding with UI toolkits, style guides, and pattern libraries. Heck, there's even a whole website about them and conference. And we also saw some forward-thinking agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the US Patent Office started to create UI frameworks for their individual agencies. But not every agency has the resources to spin up their own front-end framework. We also admired how the National Park Service created their graphic identity decades ago in the 70s, which adapted across a sprawling system of parks from brochures to physical park signage. And it did this with really simple but beautiful design tools like a beautiful font, and the Unigrid system from Massimo Vignelli was brought onto it. So we have some really, really great history of great design in our public institutions. And we wanted to do what they did in the digital space. We also looked outside our borders. We're great fans of what the Gov UK did. They were able to bring in thousands of disparate government websites into a single unified system across the entire government because of how their department operated. However, in the US, we are much more decentralized. We are way different than them, so that was never an option for us. We had the carrot, but not the stick. They also have this great principle, which is be consistent, not uniform. They try to use the same design patterns whenever they can, but it's not fixed. When they find better ways of doing things, they adapt. It's all about serving the needs of their users. So this is how we actually did it. We had to make the case to something inside the General Services Administration called the Great Pitch, which is basically an opportunity for anybody in government to pitch an idea, Shark Tank style, to improve technology in government. The pitch went through, and we had 4 months to produce an MVP. 4 months is not a lot of time. We decided to start with a simple question. What's it like to work on digital services in government? And although we, the team, work on digital services in the government, and in a sense, we are designing these tools for ourselves, we had certain assumptions that needed to be tested against because the thousands of other federal employees working in government may not share the same views as ours. We needed to explore this and started our user research. We talked to people from all around government working on digital services. We did a bunch of research and found people are falling into these categories. We created these loose user archetypes to help us design for these various audiences. Here's somebody we talked to. This is the clock racer. This unfortunate soul has been given way too much work to do in too little time, and they want to be able to stand up quick prototypes. They're more likely to choose a tool they're already familiar with than to experiment with an unfamiliar resource. Then there's the master builder. They're a savvy developer who's working alone or with others and is looking for components to download and integrate. They see their code as their personal craft and value clean semantic markup that is easy to manipulate. They have strong opinions on how code should be written, and they want to know why specific decisions were made about the code. And then there's the Lone Ranger. This is a one-off designer or front-end developer in an agency. They're trying to do the right thing, but without a lot of time or support. They will use the standards to cut down on design and development time and as a leverage to advocate for best practices to their higher-ups. And there are many more people we talk to, and each one has unique needs and challenges that appeal from beginner to advanced, and we found the following principles to guide us through these wide range of needs. So we wanted the standards to be flexible. Our goal was to create a design system for wide use across agencies and brands. We wanted the standards to be reusable. This would save time and money, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We wanted the standards to be accessible. They must work for everybody, regardless of abilities. And fourth, lastly, we wanted the standards to be open source. This increases knowledge, shared understanding, and practices across projects and agencies. I want to talk a little bit about that first point, flexibility, and in particular, flexible design. So Joanne wants to understand she's on a government website. She wants it to feel familiar and be intuitive so she knows what to do and can accomplish her task. We started to explore how we could bring consistency across interactions, user experiences, and behavior across those websites. So first, we needed to decide what components were important. So we brought in people from the Food and Drug Administration, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the VA, and we brainstormed what were the components we most needed. Next, we looked at 9 top-level .gov domains to surface common color and components. And we wondered, do we really need 32 different shades of blue? And next, we were even more surprised by how many different button styles are on government websites. Do we really need 64 different kinds of buttons? Joanne doesn't want that. We don't. So we wanted to imagine what a unified government website could look like. So we created these 3 mood boards exploring a few different options. And you can see options with type and color and some inspiration pieces. So we had clean and classic, inspiring and empowering, and a modern American look and feel. Typography is super important. Joanne needs to be able to read what's in front of her. We needed to find a font that was legible, communicated trust and credibility, and was open source. So we tested typography pairings on actual government websites to find pairings that would meet these needs. This is what we came up with. The draft standards offer a single visual style that can be flexibly applied to a broad range of government digital platforms, but it is not required. These standards are primarily about creating consistency in interactions, user experience, and behavior. They also provide default color and typography guidance for teams who specifically need visual look and feel direction. The styling can be customized to comply with an agency's existing brand guidelines so that agencies can retain their own established identities. And this is, we found, is like super important to help people getting them on board. They have their own institutional memory, and we need to be flexible so we can communicate that. So we've seen projects at various stages in their life cycles integrate the draft standards. Here are some of the examples. So if they're just starting out, they can use the whole thing, visual style and UI components. Here's an example from the VA, which applies the standards to a new case flow system for veterans' appeals. This next example is from USA Jobs, who forked our design system to create something custom-tailored for their needs. They even created new components which we hadn't even made yet. And we hope to talk more and more about how we can make use of these new components from the outside communities and include them back into the main system. And this is what it looks like in action. Cool. Yeah, so now anybody can apply for a government job a little bit easier. So if they're just in the middle of a project, it might be best to think about how they can fold parts in to their project. For example, maybe they just want to add in fonts and colors and leave the rest of the system as is. Vets.gov recently launched and did just that. They were already using Foundation, a front-end framework, by the time they decided to use the standards, and we hadn't even existed yet when they started. So they incorporated fonts, colors, and some components into their website. This is a facility locator page on their website that combines our components into their app. So if they have an existing site already, it may not make sense to integrate the complete draft standards given an agency's current needs. They could incorporate components if it made sense with their design, but they can also benefit from following best practices in accessibility and interaction patterns. So in summary, there's basically 3 ways to use the standards. You can use the whole thing, our design and our code, our design and different code, and a different design and our code. So we encourage folks to pick a flavor that works for them and their organization. So you can already start to see that we're beginning to see a lot of consistency and coherence amongst these 3 websites that are using the standards, and neither of them had any, talk to each other. So it's really, really exciting. So next, I want to talk a little bit about flexible code. So this is a really good reminder from Luke W. That we should really think about how we write our code, because the thousands of people working in federal IT and millions of Americans will be living with it. So no pressure. So we built the standards to be lightweight. It's just plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Nothing fancy, no dependencies. This lets us focus on the core interface and let outside teams and the open source community develop with other frameworks. We already have teams building WordPress and Drupal themes with it. And we built it with Sass, but we also offer compiled CSS for teams who don't need it. And just in general, about our tooling, we want these tools to reduce repetition and help developers, but we don't want to sacrifice readability and understanding of the code. We want it to be accessible, and we don't want to get too fancy. So we also wondered, how do we write our code so it can be used from beginners to advanced developers? We did the research and talked to our developers. We asked them questions like how they wrote their CSS, how willing they'd be to change how they wrote it, and what was truly important to them about CSS. Here are the things they told us they liked. So they told us they liked modular CSS and a simple and easy to understand syntax. When asked if they'd be willing to change how they wrote CSS for something else, most people surprisingly said yes. If we had something that was reasonable, they'd use it. The age-old question, to BEM or not to BEM? So object-oriented CSS and BEM has some value. It has a lot of value. It keeps your CSS modular and safe from any changes in the markup. We thought that the most experienced developers would favor this approach, but actually only a small percentage of developers even used BEM. And we couldn't reasonably expect thousands of government employees to learn a completely new language, and we don't want to add more red tape to our already red tape covered jobs. So we decided to go with a modified BEM syntax described in 18F's front-end coding style guide. It still uses modular principles, but without the bloat of the double dashes and underscores. So BEM in object-oriented CSS is really good at keeping your CSS modular, but it tends to fill your HTML up with classes. After we put this out there, we heard more and more developers wanting simpler implementations of components. They wanted less classes in their markup. In other words, more nesting or more using native selectors. They wanted more things assumed. So we're still figuring out the balance between these two needs and their trade-offs. We're still working out what this reasonable approach will look like. They're not? No, it wasn't. It was okay. I just talked a lot on that one. It'll get more exciting. So everything we do is public from day one. Our work is in the public domain. It's public property. You pay for it. It belongs to you. You literally pay for my salary. So working this way may seem scary at first, but it has a lot of benefits. Working in the open makes your code more secure and higher quality because people are catching mistakes more easily and frequently. So this project has had a ton of benefits from working in the open source. We've had over 50 people contributing code, from typos to bug fixes to complete code refactors. Over 200 people have been participating in conversations on GitHub issues. And 150 people have submitted GitHub issues. We love our contributors, and in our first week since launching, we had 22 contributors whose code was merged into master. And half of them were from the public, and half were from the government in various sectors. So working in open source means you can get answers from anybody. We got help from across the pond when Robin Whittleton, head of front end at GovUK, helped us out. Even though we officially support Internet Explorer 9 and above, Robin submitted a PR to ensure our radio buttons worked in IE8, and we merged it in. Tyson Gatch, the maintainer of Bourbon by Thoughtbot, submitted PRs around the future upgrade of Bourbon, and all in all, making sure our CSS is awesome and the best it can be. We also got help from the Iron Chef of type design, Mr. Eric Speakerman. We reached out to him kind of on a whim, and we wanted to ask him what font he thought was the best font for America. He said, without a doubt, I can't do the German accent, but Morse Fuller Benton's 20th century American Gothics. So we knew we needed to use an open source font to support everyone that needed to use them. So we tested all of our fonts with users, and the top picks were Source Sans Pro for our sans serif and Meriwether for our serif. Soon after, we discovered that Source Sans Pro was actually inspired by Morse Fuller Benton's American Gothics. So this was a really great moment because it allowed us to honor American typographic heritage and our open source principles. And then lastly, Adobe, who made that font, they're very famous for their closed source, very expensive design products. They created that open source font, and they reached out to us to help create a custom set of the font that was optimized for our needs. So really, really awesome to have contributors from everywhere. And then here's a live templating tool developed by another agency in the government. It's really neat. You can just copy and paste markup on the left and see it output on the right away, and you can manipulate it and play with it. So it's a really nice way to like show people different aspects of the standards. So another thing is that if you want to have a healthy open source community, you want people to come back to your repository. You want them to keep opening issues and contributing code. So Mozilla actually had this analysis project around contributions, and they found that you had to respond to a GitHub issue within 24 hours, and you had to respond to a code review within 48 hours. This doesn't mean you have to have the whole answer right away. Just a simple thank them and acknowledge them for submitting and that it'll be reviewed is enough. If you wait 2 weeks, they won't come back. And then lastly, be kind. Just always thank the contributor for their contribution. Let them know what they shared was valuable and will be reviewed regardless of whether or not you will use their contribution. So when you work for the government, accessibility isn't simply a nice to have. It's not an add-on. It's the law. It's important that what we create works for everyone. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to Stevie Wonder. This was an awesome moment at the Grammys this year where Stevie said, "We need to make every single thing accessible to every single person with a disability." So I think we should all just listen to more Stevie Wonder. So accessibility is really hard, and it takes time, so we wanted this to be easier. We built in accessible code into the components themselves, and we have some best practices to build accessible websites using the standards. We start with HTML5 with ARIA. HTML5 gives developers a lot of the role elements out of the box, but it doesn't offer everything that ARIA does for accessibility. So HTML5 with ARIA provides greater accessibility across a wider range of accessible technology. Testing is really important, so we test all of our code to ensure Section 508 compliance. We follow an accessibility checklist and use various tools to ensure this, and we want more and more of this to be automated in the future, so if any of you know any good tools, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from them. And then for a final release, a manual review with a screen reader is the best way to ensure a quality user experience. And then a little bit about documentation. So copying and pasting code as is without changing the ARIA attributes for your use case is just as bad and possibly worse than leaving them out completely. So to combat this, we included documentation with every component that tells you when and how you should modify the code to ensure it stays accessible. We also have some general best practices that apply to something thematically like forms. And our American-inspired color palette is accessible out of the box, and we have guidelines about how to use them in different combinations. People may need to change the colors for their agency needs, so we encourage them to test the combinations themselves. In the wild, one second. So next I'd like to talk about how the standards are doing in the wild. Since launching the project, it's become the second most starred repository in the federal government. 50 websites are using it or plan to use the standards. We were thrilled at the response we had from the public. We found our new team motto, which is, "What a time to be alive." We made Brad really enthusiastic and really proud to be an American. We also made people just feel a little weird for liking a government website design. How cool is that? But not everybody was happy. Not everybody understood it. So here's a translation of our design system from English to American. They can open a pull request. So we also found out about a whole listserv in the government that we didn't even know existed, and that's like, we have this issue of how do we communicate what we're doing to everybody else in government. The government is huge. There's probably a few 100,000 people working in federal IT today across the United States. So through conversations in that listserv, we found out that federal employees were concerned that they'd have to use this outside thing that this outside group just dropped off to them. And I've seen this phrase many times today, but yes, naming things is really, really hard because we rustled some feathers actually because we called it a standard when it really wasn't an official government standard. So something went up to some higher ups and we ended up changing the name to draft standard. Despite calling it alpha, it wasn't enough. So words have a lot of meaning for people, and it's important to kind of choose your words carefully. And then lastly, there's been some initial conversation about whether or not this should become a real web policy or standard and what that would look like. We don't have answers yet, but it's a question. So before we didn't really have a home, the team, and now we found our home in the Federal Front Door Initiative. It's a new initiative to improve how people interact with the government across the board. So we'll begin exploring some deeper issues like, what does it mean to trust a government website? And what does it mean to have your voice heard by a government agency? And what about this black box of what is actually even happening in the government? Tell me about it. And how do we deal with multilingual people? So, and importantly, can those things be captured in design patterns? We think this is going to make the standards even more useful and valuable. And lastly, some final thoughts. So recently, the standards, we had a prototype on a new project that we're working on, and this is what one user research participant said after going through it. She said, "I like the clean format. I like that it shows me all the things I need to fill out all at once. I can read it fine. Sometimes I need my reading glasses because of the colors, but this is good because it's got sharp contrast." And this is what it's all about. Good civic design, at its core, is about access. Access to government services and information must be available to all, regardless of circumstance, device, or location. Good design ensures this. It means that people can get the right help sooner and with less stress. And I remember this from Jen Palka's talk at the 2015 Code for America Summit. She said, "The barriers here that matter are not technical. You have an amazing team of people who understand policy, law, and regulation, and are some of the best in the country. Your organizational structure is not set up to understand what users experience when they are using your service." So design can improve the interaction people have with their government by having clear and open communication with the public. By understanding what people experience when they use public services, we can design and build better systems to meet the public's needs. So this is 18F. This is really challenging work, and it's the first time we've ever tried this. We're learning a lot, and we're messing up a lot, but we're having fun. So if you're interested in working on some really, really hard problems with a huge impact for Americans and people's lives, actually, just come work with us. We are hiring. And thank you so much.
Wow, lots of good stuff in there. Lots of good stuff. One of the interesting ones was that, and other people covered the fact that a design system might be for different types of people. It might be, it's for designers, it's for developers. It has a lot of people like consume a style guide,
Right.
but you went even into like subtypes really. You might be a front-end developer, but you might be junior or senior, or as you put it, like the clock master or the super builder or whatever.
Yeah.
I hadn't really considered that the scope of a style guide might be you have one job title, but it's like there's sub-people.
Yeah, and when you're working on a lot smaller teams, it's a lot easier because you know your team, but like how do you build this thing that is for everybody? So that's the question, that's the challenge.
Right, and there was a bunch of research, obviously. Was it months of research? Or?
So the initial project was 4 months. Like we had 4 months of funds, and we had to, launch something at the end of that. So we did as much as we can.
That's the promise you make at the end of the great pitch?
Yes.
So the
they
pitch
give you
was,
money, and then the money's going to run out at 4 months. So
hurry up.
Yeah, hurry up.
Hurry up, and only part of that could be research because you need to produce something.
Yeah,
too.
but we did the full research. We had in our team like user research specialists, visual designers, other designers, and front end and PM. So we had a wide scope.
Funny. I wonder how many, because I think a lot of people do research before they start one, but I wonder how much and how much they actually wait. Because I don't know, if I had the idea to do a design system, it'd be so exciting to just get started right away. I'd be like, all right, let's start building this thing. But should you wait, or can you do them in tandem, like the research? And
I think you can do them in tandem. Like I said, we talked to a lot of people, but we also had our eyes open on styleguides.io and seeing what everybody else is doing.
Right,
So
and the
you can kind
the
of
content
combine
inventory stuff.
Yeah, you can combine that.
Okay, and I think that tied to another thing you said. You're, I don't know if struggling is the right word, but like trying to pick, do we BEM or do not BEM? Like, what's the kind of HTML structure that we expect or whatever? Like, is part of the reason that's hard because different people have different needs?
Yeah, because you go out with it, thinking that, developers initially said, oh, I want this to be really modular, but what you get with that is tons of like classes in your markup, and then it's like much harder to implement when they need to do changes, and it's annoying for them to do that. And
that's like kind of unsolved.
It is unsolved, and I was like having a thought the other day. I think it kind of also depends on how stable your component is. Like if it's just like a simple button with like nothing there, that might not change. So I think what you do there is okay. But if it's something that's gonna, you're gonna be doing a lot of tables or changing things around, maybe putting a ton of classes there isn't the best thing. So maybe we can come back a little bit to the Cascade.
Yeah, long live the Cascade. So if Source Sans is like the closest thing to an open source, all-American bot, what is like the most American JavaScript library?
I have no idea. Vanilla JS.
Oh, good. Color scheme, red, white, and blue. Should we go?
I mean,
okay.
you didn't have to fight too hard for those.
For you to, it's straight up. It's red, white, and blue, right?
It
The
is
color.
red, white, and blue.
Oh, how could it not be, really? No oranges up in this style guide.
Actually, we do have some like yellows and stuff. Like those are our secondary colors.
Oh,
we have greens, purple.
No.
No.
I'm going to submit a pull request. No more.
No
Only
more.
red, white, and blue. So what do you say? USA Jobs, VA, 50 different websites?
There are 50, yeah. We have a spreadsheet.
I hope there's a spreadsheet. I hope it gets really long.
Yeah.
Because I think there was some questions of people assuming maybe that it's a mandatory thing, but it's not really. Like you just created it, and now it's there, and now people can use it.
Right.
But that would be a whole other ballgame if you said,
Right.
now the entire government must use this.
They would be really mad with us if we said that.
Yeah,
So.
so you very much chose to have it.
We wanted to like make the best thing the easiest thing. Like make a tool that like, why wouldn't you want to use this? This is great. This is like best practices. This has all the accessibility things that I need. Like, yeah, let's use it.
Yeah, and that seems to be working. It's
Yeah,
relatively
and
new.
People, people are, but like you said, not everybody knew about it because we couldn't communicate everything to the thousands and thousands of developers in the government, because we wouldn't have been able to make anything if we did that. So we kind of just selected like a few that we thought were important and that we had contacts with to kind of initially get it started. But now it's all out there. Now it's in the open.
Yeah, and you've observed people migrate to it and start new things with it both separately, right?
Yeah.
In little bits. And that was a fascinating part there. Like some people use just the design of it and like, well, whatever, we'll just copy it so it looks the same. We've seen people just use the code but keep their own design and then both, right?
Right. That's the best.
Yeah, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I mean, the best is whatever works for the agency.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. And the accessibility comes for the ride. Well, in a sense, of course, we learned a little bit about accessibility. It's a little harder than just assume that it's there when you use a style guide. But it being the law is a little twist in this project, isn't it? Yeah.
It's the law. You will get fired if it's not. Just kidding. I don't think you really will.
I know. You wonder what the consequences really are, though. Do you?
I don't know.
Fines. It's not good. Whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the government
I think a bald eagle pecks your eyes out.
Yeah, the government has a lot of like bad things. You could see the previous slide with all the bad websites, but they have a couple of good things going for themselves. Like, yeah, accessibility is the law. It should be that way. Yes, everything we do is open source. It should be that way. So it's got a couple of good things there too.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the tech stack a little bit like? Did you have to pick things that felt weird to pick? Like, is there like SAS involved or?
Yeah, well, we all felt comfortable with SAS specifically, so we knew we were going to use that. We like sprinkled in a little bit of Bourbon and Neat from Thoughtbot, and what else? Like I said, it's pretty plain. Actually, when we started out, I mean, the site itself, the style guide website, is a Jekyll website. So it's
that's
all
a dependency.
Yeah, so that's a dependency for the style guide website, but not for the system itself.
Yeah, you wouldn't need that.
But now in the
So
second.
you weren't afraid to make choices about stuff like that, though, right?
No, and in the beginning we were, but we talked it out a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.